Hello and welcome to another video for teachers or learners of English. And if you've been following my playlist and the videos, you will have seen already dispelling the myths about English, also the functions of have. But today we're going to go more into detail on those two aspects. You can watch those videos first if you like, or watch this one and followed up by the others. So, Dispelling the Myths about English Grammar Tenses is another file in my Evernote folder. When you have Evernote Premium, you can access more than the ebook. So, you can buy the ebook and then you will get these upgrades at no extra cost. Just need Evernote Premium because of the amount of content. There are files you will need to have the premium to access the data that's in there. So I call have the existential have, and it's really a question of knowing when to have and not to have. That's the question. So if you're confused about perfect versus the past tense, well, I have good news for you. You needn't memorize tenses in English. You only need to know what functions have serves, when to use it, and when to leave it out. It's kind of like the zero article. When do I need the article a or an or not? So, have plus past participle, which actually we can look at it, analyze it another way as a resultative adjective, basically serves to show a predisposition towards a condition or circumstance we find ourselves in based on our experience. We call it the existential have because it is our experience of something at the core of our being, which we choose to claim to be our own. Further down, it means this is the situation. It is not really about temporality, as we will see. But consider this. I did my grocery shopping today, yesterday, whenever. It's in the past because we see the did confirms doing something in the past here, did. And so I bought what was needed for sustenance. Whereas if I use the have, I'm going to put the done here. So I've done the shopping, which implies that the receiver won't need to shop because the groceries are already here. So if you're speaking to somebody, your partner, for example, and you're saying, look, I've done the shopping, you don't need to do it, would be the function of have, or one of the functions. That's why it's called perfect. It means that it's just as it should be, nothing more, nothing less. Temporality as such is not the focus. And so we can not really actually call it the present perfect either. It is the meaning of existentiality. Consider this. Mother has had another child. The had means she gave birth. She delivered the child. Has is talking about the responsibility for another life to take care of. Mother has had another child. Just happens to be the syntax we use those two words. Therefore, we might say she has plus to care for her children. Now, the other myth, as I mentioned already, this have to is another myth. There's no such thing as has or have to, because to is part of the prepositional phrase, right? It's not part of has. Anyhow, more on conditionality further on. This here, having a child, is a conditional, the biological condition. And the have to social aspect, have is again a social convention. So why we use have? The question comes up in forums and questions to teachers all the time, right? When do you use have with verbs and when do we leave it out? Well, we needn't memorize tenses. You only need to know what function have serves. Have basically serves to show predisposition towards a condition or circumstance we find ourselves in. I call it the existential have, as I say, because it is our experience of something at the core of our being. We can use have to show possession. Now, if I say I have two children, if I'm a mother of two children, it just means I have the experience of having to bring up two children. I never possess a child. I never really actually possess a child. So, it's questionable whether you call this possession either. It actually means I bore two children or I bore a child twice, which we will never say, of course. Rarely say anyway. I will never say it, of course. We use have for simpler wording because it is an experience. I carry the responsibility of bearing and rearing a child, or burden for some. To this day, regardless of the time factor of when I actually gave birth. Experience can be individual or collective. Let's take a different approach to the same concept. Reminder, English does not have a future tense. As for have in the future, so-called future perfect, I'm of the opinion that it should be restricted to past contexts. No joke. It's more used as a historical future than it is with actual future event contexts. Probably statistically, if we looked it up, you'll find that so-called future perfect is used in historical contexts. So, for example, by 1886, he will have gathered 16 disciples, whereby have describes achievements of the man in question. Avoid this structure in real future aspects since it is nothing but speculation. Finally, the had in the so-called past perfect is a different matter, though not entirely different. It basically denotes one action or event happening before another. I did this before I did that, which will translate as I had done this before I did that. But only in cases we should use this so-called past perfect where we would want to stress the importance of one action happening before another. Have denotes a state. Unlike that of the above, however, she had a swim is a dynamic verb denoting an event. Some will say it's dilexical. I don't think it is dilexical. It has a lexical function, it has a semantic function, and so it's not really dilexical. Usage is divided as to whether we have a static have as an auxiliary or a lexical verb. Those who say she hasn't enough credit, or have we to invite them all, must we? They're treated as auxiliary. She doesn't have enough credit, or do we have to invite them all? If you notice, we've got here the auxiliary do, here with as have as a main verb, have we to, and then invite just is the result. To is the purpose, and not, as we said, not infinitive. It's rubbish again. She didn't have enough credit. Do we have to invite them? So really got to see this as have is the situation, to is the purpose of inviting. It's separate. More myths. So this is insider knowledge, which you will not obtain in regular course books for English as a foreign language. The reason is it's more convenient to tell you rubbish because it simplifies having to actually explain how the language works. So, for example, the so-called word chunk is actually be going to. And in fact, we can look at it another way, whereby be is part of the structure, but to actually isn't. As in, I'm going to see the doctor tomorrow. So I am going, it's my intention, and to is the purpose, to see the doctor. This is not actually be going to, although you could look at it as a word chunk. But it's more important to understand the function of going, or be with the ing and go, plus to and the next phrase. In the same way, it would be wrong to state that the so-called present continuous is without be. This is referring, of course, to the be going to. In English, the future tense is fictional, construed concept, since there is no future tense in English. One of the functions of the so-called present continuous tense involves describing exceptions to routine. Using ing with be puts the focus on the action or activity that is otherwise not the norm. So actually, the be with the ing expresses temporality, and that's the true present. The aspect of continuous, it's not always continuous, though temporal things tend to be drawn out, but it's focused on the activity. Have to is not a modal or a semi-modal, although it acts like a modal must. Some would call it a semi-modal. I take it yet a different approach and say that it is have for norms, conventions, given situations, plus the verb with a to, I would say for eventuality, direction, or purpose. I'm going to take away this infinitive. This is a Latin, infinitive is simply a Latin term. It's not necessary in English. Now, from a lexical approach, have or has serves its own function, and so does to. Linguists don't share the same views, and we can forget how coursebook publishers handle things. They need to stop limiting language and assess matters more accurately instead of backing deplorable simplification and false or watered down assumptions about how language works. Now, by simplification, I don't mean the simplification of ellipsis. I mean the watering down of the language. If we took a different approach, take it a step further, and say that the speaker is possibly omitting a modal before have, we could look at it this way. I will have to leave early in the event that the person is speaking about a future eventuality. Or then it could be expressing a norm. Every day I have to leave early. Again, there's not enough context behind the average grammar exercise and explanations or example sentences that they give. And so if we take a lexical approach to language, you'll always have to understand the function and the context. Have bears existential meaning, which is why it's called perfect in the first place. Will is not the future tense. It is a modal verb and can serve any one of several functions. Now, this is maybe the subject for another video with will and futurity, but just to show you the list of the possible functions of the modal will, as with all modals, there are many functions to express mood. So these are all conditionality, the different ones. Now, none of those are without, meaning we imply if. So I will help you if you allow it, or if that's okay, or if I'm not intruding. So the will is about offering reassurance, promises. It will rain is also saying if my prediction is right, or according to the forecasters, the experts, so-called experts. These are opinionated forecasts, predictions. The last sentence is, he will be here. This means if he doesn't die beforehand or has some other stumbling block which impedes or prevents him from being here. I want to emphasize the importance of getting it right and understanding our language. Thank you for joining.